full of.
Right. So, Mr. Reed. Morning, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. With your leave, I'll take clauses 1 to 5 as read. We move straight to the summary beginning with point 5. And also with your leave, I'll paraphrase, I'll depart from the text that we have here in the summary. And the reason for that is I heard loud and clear yesterday that the Commission didn't feel that there was a narrative really tangibly read from the documentation. And I think that I can provide something of a nutshell, a narrative to be heard alongside the documentation with relation to the water management, monitoring, and the aspects of the assessments that we've done. So, very good. The farmland at the application site, it's bounded to the west by the Tasman Sea and to the east in rough terms by Te Wharewhare, the Lake Mananui. The site's hydrology is fixed heads. And by heads, I mean these are surface water bodies that have permanent presence and a water level elevation. And the mode of land drainage is primarily defined by vertical percolation through the soil profile to the underlying water table. So these are the basic ingredients of the hydrology, the groundwater hydrology, and therefore the transport of chemical constituents with water underneath the site and through external to the site. So the vertical percolation, what's termed groundwater recharge, is very important. In the documentation, you will have seen that the Hokitika Airport has a long climate record, which places a median and mean close to 2,700 millimetres per annum, which is quite high for a coastal area. And that the groundwater recharge component of that is between 1,500 and 1,800 millimetres per year. Considerable recharge, and the soil and the subsoil and the water table hosted within the aquifer is capable of taking that volume of annual contribution from the climate, from meteoric water, and then distributing it mostly to the Tasman Sea directly. But there is what we term a groundwater divide. It's a wavy line that passes roughly north to south down through the application site. And that wavy line is displaced towards the east. And the implication of that is approximately a fifth or 20% of the application site contributes to Te Wharewhare, the wetlands, and to the Mananui Creek. And the remaining 4/5 contribute to the Tasman Sea. So this westerly, approximately westerly, southwesterly flow towards the Tasman Sea from the majority of the site. And that frames my overall consideration of the site, its hydrology. And I wanted to sketch that out to ensure that it was clearly sort of stated. This state, this hydrology, overall hydrological pattern would persist throughout the 10 years proposed for mining operations and the further years of rehabilitation. It wouldn't be in any way significantly disrupted by that. The groundwater flow divide would endure, would twitch slightly like a curtain as the mine path would pass through the flow divide area. And a groundwater flow divide is not like a surface water divide. It's not a brick wall. It can move. It's constructed out of groundwater gradients in one direction or another. But the existing pattern of hydrological responses to climate and near field surface water flows would persist throughout the mining process. While makes its way back into the ground. And the principal means of making its way back into the ground is the balancing that occurs in the dredge pond. The subsidiary or lesser return path is through the infiltration trench, which is intended as an important reserve balancing system for surpluses of water from the mine water circuit, which are best placed in that site because of its being in a different catchment, different groundwater catchment to Te Wharewhare. And because it's well placed, that infiltration trench, in that it's moving southwest or west-southwest towards the Tasman Sea, and there are no identifiable receptors of a surface water nature or a well or a bore or a groundwater connectivity system. So I hope that starts to knit in the overview understanding of the groundwater system and how the proposed mining activities dovetail into that groundwater system. So moving to clause 9, additional offsets of dredge pond edge from the domestic water supplies are to be maintained. So this is one of our sensitive receptors. In terms of this project, we have water supply wells or bores, which are located adjacent to dwellings up in the northwest corner, and we're offsetting 100 metres from the property boundaries, such that there wouldn't be a mining edge extending closer than that, in that direction. The surrounding area's surface water and significant wetlands are expected to receive due protection against mining-related hydrological or water quality impacts. So I'm moving into the question of wetlands now. And the two main wetland areas that I consider, firstly, are a wetland which is in a depression. It's been identified in the dock reserve land, almost immediately on the boundary, what we call the southern boundary.
Yeah, I know the one.
Yes, so tab 18,
Yeah.
you see that there's a blue hatched area, and helpfully there's 100-metre offset from the edge of that blue hatched area that surrounds it.
So is this the one directly to the south, is it?
It is, yes.
Right, okay.
So the mine path in its first year comes up to within 15 or 20 metres of this particular wetland. It is aligned with the corrugated iron type effect of, this is the undulation of the land surface that Mr. Tom Ritchie referred to in terms of the strand lines. And it is essentially what hydrologists call perched or sort of upwardly capped on its underside by the decomposition of leaf litter and the buildup of clays and silts, which form the subsoil to that piece of ground underneath the wetland. So perching means that it's at a higher elevation and vertically separated from the regional water table. All of the other discussion about groundwater and water table that I have in my documentation and then I will talk with here regards the regional water table. But in this case, that wetland has a highly localized perched water table that is its genesis. That's the reason that there is a wetland there.
Can I just refer you to tab 4?
Yes.
And the red line is the year 1 mining path, which shows pathway past the wetland.
Yes.
And you can see the wetland is slightly different colour.
Yes.
Do I take it that that is as a wetland in the sense that it isn't a body of water, but it is hydric soils with wetland hydrophytic species within it, typically, or is there above ground water levels?
Yeah. As I understand it, wetlands are defined by matters of hydrology, soil, and vegetation. Those are the three stools. And I'm probably more qualified to comment about the soil in the hydrological part, but I appreciate that there is a vegetative association with the.
But I'm just interested, from your observation, is there visible water at the ground, above the ground level, or is?
Following whether there is.
There is.
Yes.
And this is what area? What area is this wetland?
Oh, I think it's about 7,000 square meters, 7,000 square meters or so. So it's not quite approaching it's not quite approaching a hectare.
Yeah, so it's roughly 2/3 of a hectare or thereabouts.
If I can speculate, I believe that wetlands similar to that would have existed prior to land clearance and pasture conversion, if you like, or pasture development in the application site, the farmland, and that the current perched wetland is as healthy as a wetland as it is because it has not experienced that land clearance and pasture development. You will see on your site visit that following a wet May and early June, that there are multiple areas of standing water on the soil in the farmed area. And they are all sitting in the swales and the hollows, the the dumal slacks, if you use a geomorphological
Yeah.
term.
Yeah.
And they are, in some cases, they're concentrated there by soil pugging, if there has been animals there in recent time, and the deposition and clogging of the soil surface by humus and clay minerals and that sort of thing. So the infiltration that I spoke of earlier, the groundwater recharge, is primarily occurring on the high points, where this formation of lower permeabilities soil surfaces hasn't yet occurred, but these perched little pieces, well, they're big pieces at the moment of standing water. They have similarities to the wetland that I'm referring to, but I understand that they don't have the status of being a natural inland wetland in terms of the guidelines.
Right. Oh,
Neither are they permanent.
yeah. We'll come to that with Dr. Keeson. But so, are you saying that in that 7,000 square meters, essentially, in groundwater terms, there's a geological enclosure of the hydrology that's the principal source of the water?
Yes. So it's enclosed within the swale topography, and it's underlain by a low permeability, very thin low permeability layer in soil subsoil, and that's why it's perched, and that's what permits it to be we think, perennially saturated forest wetland.
Right. Whereas in other swales, the degree of saturation would vary depending on season.
Indeed.
And so forth. So it's that little bit of what I call a pan.
Yep.
That's making this so permanent that hydrophytic species can dominate.
Indeed. And in the farmland, the areas similar to the forested wetland are exposed to much higher levels of evapotranspiration.
Yeah.
So whereas the wetlands themselves are protected by the microclimate within the forested land around it.
Right. And so, hence, because of that difference, you get facultative species which are capable of accepting wet, but also can live in other conditions, whereas in more permanent conditions, you have the hydrophytic species, the ones that will necessarily live in that.
Yes. Yeah.
And if I was to look over the fence, to look at that wetland, would I see a noticeably different vegetative composition?
The understory, yes, I believe you do, but once again, you have to refer a question on that to Mr. Keeson.
Yeah.
Dr. Keeson.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
So when you say the soil conditions under the wetland to the south are very low permeability, which creates the wetness, how do you know that through testing, or how do you know that?
Yes, I didn't do it myself, but I commissioned the augering of soil and then of the underlying moist sand by a geologist. And from memory, it was 6 or 7 soil augers done and logged. That is, material is recovered from the subsurface, and the maximum depth of augering was 2 meters before refusal, before they couldn't auger any further. These are hand augers.
Right, so it's evidence-based. Yeah, good.
And the trench that you're proposing, is that an additional precaution to maintain a positive water balance, or is it not related to that?
That's unrelated.
Unrelated.
But my point is that we can drive the dredge pond and the mining activity right past the front door of that wetland. And the wetland won't see any of the influences that the dredge pond has on the regional water table, because it's dissociated from the regional water table. Regional water table is at about 4.5 meters below ground level at that point. And we found dry sands underneath the perching layer, the low permeability perching layer.
And how do you, I understand that that would be what you would expect because of the geology.
Yes.
But how do you actually monitor that that's correct?
Yes, we can do correlative monitoring at the time of the mining activity. That's written large. That's a simple exercise. We can have a water level pinger, an ultrasonic pinger, that's simply looking at the standing water in that perched wetland. And we have very accurate water level monitoring on the sand mining dredge. So it has high precision GPS fixing, so we know relative to that transponder where the dredge pond water level is. If, contrary to all of our measurements of the water table, if we found that the dredge pond water level was rising on the approach to the perched wetland, we would know something's wrong and we'd have to do a reappraisal. Now that's almost a ridiculous proposition. That's not going to happen, but that's one line of monitoring and reappraisal that would be protective. I think the important thing is that my professional opinion is that we understand the processes which give rise to this perched wetland in the forested area, and that gives us the tools with which to recognise a departure from our conceptual model, how it works, with the monitoring available to us.
But 7,000, the additional water that might be in a 7,000 square metre area is not likely to make a significant change to the water monitoring within the dredge. So that doesn't seem to me a sophisticated tool to check that. But wouldn't it be possible to have tools to observe changes in the wetland itself in terms of how it appears and its saturation and all of those sorts of things? Because I would have thought a saturation tool would give you, if you had baseline saturation data, and then you continue to monitor during the year one going past that, because obviously you don't need to do it right at the start. It's where you come proximate to it, because this theory should work. There's not a lot of doubt about it. But as a sort of belts and braces, wouldn't a saturation type of measurement within the wetland help? Certainly
a soil tensiometer, which measures moisture content all the way from 100% to 0%. That's a tool. But from past experience, probably the most useful tool in that context would be a digital thermometer that sits in the water of the wetland. The moment that the body of that thermometer is exposed to the air, it reflects the air temperature in the diurnal cycles.
Right.
So you would place the thermometer high in the column of water, so it's just below the surface. When you had 4 or 5 centimetres worth of water level fall within the wetland, that would be detectable and picked up by the telemetry that's attached to the thermometer and be recognisable and configurable with an alarm, in fact, that the thermometer is no longer submerged.
I could have thought of taking the temperature of a wetland, but it's an interesting idea.
We use it for intermittent rivers for
Right,
the most part, because we can warrant our stake in thermometers up and down the river.
Yeah.
And link them radio networks.
So is that monitoring, is that proposed in the
No,
through the conditions, or is that something to be inserted?
Well, no, it's not proposed. It's not in the water management monitoring mitigation plan. Simply because it was my professional opinion that it wasn't required. If monitoring was required, one way of approaching it would be by visual observation, because there will be a lot of people around and about during this time, and there will be a dedicated team whose pretty much their sole job is to run the environmental monitoring network. So on their checklist would be observations of the appearance and the height of water level on a staff gauge that we can put into the soil, essentially a yellow calibrated site gauge. And that's a very simple way of conducting it. The changes that would occur
proposed in the conditions,
is not.
but you are, I think, recommending at least that.
I would suggest that you would go in that direction before you go to a sophisticated approach such as a tensiometer or a thermometer.
So you would anticipate that someone like Mr. Ross
Yes.
would be trained by Dr. Keesing to set up a observational monitoring scheme to say, well, look, how is it performing? Just checking it with some degree of scientific rigor. And that would be sufficient given the low, very improbable or impossible outcome that's something that the model doesn't work.
Yes, that would accord with what I believe is practical and effective.
Yeah.
So you could then maintain a log of observations,
Yes,
correlate that with rainfall,
indeed.
because this is recharge mainly through rainfall.
Yes, totally with rainfall.
So if there was a significant drop, would there therefore be a trigger in the conditions that require you to act?
And the water management responses in such an instance, I don't know what I would propose at this point. Sitting here right now, I'd be quite happy to accept it as homework.
Well, it is that. Can I just take you back to the general hydrology explanation I found really interesting? By reference to the map, the plan, then let's say the plan in tab 9. Where do you say the dividing line roughly runs between the groundwater system moving? Is it exhibited by those blue lines in that plan that show a different direction of hydrology to, sorry, groundwater? Is that what they're indicating?
So this is
Water
final
divide?
form rehabilitation plan. Is that the heading for it?
Yeah.
No, this shows surface flows across the land surface.
Right.
And these are the directions of surface runoff following heavy rain.
Yeah.
Rather than groundwater.
Yeah. So what is that thing in there called water divide?
I think we must Oh, yes, this is the surface water divide. The groundwater divide and the surface water divide are somewhat coincident, but they're not exactly the same.
Right, and so just explain to me,
So that's page 13 of the evidence, I think, isn't it? Figure 4. So that's
Yes.
line, that blue
Yes,
line
indeed.
that's going that way.
right. Thank you. And just explain to me what causes that again?
So we have these two fixed heads, these two receptors of groundwater. The groundwater flows out towards and then seeps into these water bodies. And to the east side is the wetlands and Te Wharewhare, which we can consider as one unit.
Mm-hmm.
And to the west, we have the Tasman Sea.
Right.
And coming from above, vertically, we have rain.
Mm.
And the net composition of that, which is the majority, makes its way to the water table. So then it sheds. One element goes in the roughly east direction, and the other element towards the sea in the westerly direction. Topography has some influence on this, but essentially it's the balance of the groundwater recharge from above and the position and water level elevation of the sea and the wetlands and creek that determines where this groundwater divide occurs.
It's quite,
And
it's
the
very simplistic
permeability
model.
of the ground.
Yeah, I had a normal simplistic model where it was essentially all going out to sea, but
Mhm.
in a localized level, it can be reorganized.
It is different. Yeah, put aside any thought that the Te Wharewhare flows towards the sea via the ground. It doesn't. It stays within its own cavity, if you like, along its length until it emerges at the Hokitika River Hapua.
Right.
Just to expand on that point. So is Te Wharewhare being recharged by this groundwater on the side of the divide?
Yes, yeah, a very small component of the flow into Wharewhare is groundwater that has fallen as rain on the eastern side of that groundwater flow divide.
Okay.
So it's part of that fifth of the application site is part of its catchment. Now, I'll next talk, if we're okay with the perched water table in the perched wetland, I'll next talk about the wetlands which are associated with Te Wharewhare and Lake Manapua. And these are connected to the regional water table, the main groundwater system, and they're riparian wetlands also. So first thing I'll stress is the wetlands associated with Lake Manapua and Te Wharewhare are not groundwater dependent ecosystems. They're not GDEs. They are not dependent and reliant on groundwater alone. Their principal source of hydrological support is Lake Manapua and the Creek River itself. And the groundwater component, which seeps into the creek, is a very minor component of that. So that's the first thing I want to stress.
If you had to put a figure on that, what would it be its groundwater contribution?
So 1,000 litres a second is a good sort of median value for the flow of out from Lake Manapua down to Wharewhare, and we're talking in the range of 4 to 5 litres a second. So it's 0.5%.
So that 110 cumex is it? The flow?
No, it's not 110 cubics. One cubic is
1
1,000
cubic,
litres a
that's right.
second. I'm trying to keep it in litres a second at all times
Right.
because jumping from cubics to
Yeah,
litres
that's
a
right,
second.
So it's not actually that big a flow, really.
The contribution from groundwater is not large, but also the release from Lake Manapua at low flow is not large either. In March, April this year, there was a extended dry period. And I certainly saw Te Wharewhare at a level that I would have comfortably waded across it. And I certainly had not seen it in that light when I first visited it in the winter of 2022.
Which is part of the natural cycles that wetlands are adapted to absorb.
Yes.
Just to clarify, because I just looked at some of the profiles and Dr. Keeson's evidence. So the eastern escarpment on this side,
Yes.
is it at a higher level than Waitakere?
The eastern escarpment and the forested area sits several metres well above the wetlands into Wharewhare.
Okay.
That difference gets softened as you move north. So if you are looking at the land and the Wharewhare at the tram line walking track, you'll see much less of an escarpment type effect. There is a ridge there, but it's much softened on what it is in the southeast corner.
Okay.
So with the Te Wharewhare strand, you haven't gauged that, have you?
We have one gauging.
You do, okay. Right.
So it was in 2018, and it was following some significant rain.
Okay.
And so the result of that gauging was set at 17 cubics or 17,000 litres a second. So it's a high flow for Wharewhare.
But you don't have any other sort of representative?
Well, as I've included in my assessments, we have the National Institute of Water and Atmosphere's modelling of the Manapua catchment outflows. And that is as good as we have. It takes 5 years, preferably 10 years, to develop a statistically significant hydrological data set from which to generate statistics. And we haven't had a flow station on Te Wharewhare at all. So we are reliant, but also reasonably comfortable in utilising the hydrological correlations of NIWA in this context.
In fact, I suppose that there's such a small percentage of groundwater recharge from the site to that river sort of makes it irrelevant, doesn't it?
Well, it gives us some comfort that we have the relativity about right. So I've dealt with the riparian wetlands, the ones connected with the regional water table at the margins of the lake and the creek. And moving on to 13, the need for multiple barriers against the release of elevated concentrations of dissolved metals to water bodies or water supplies would envisage mitigating practices. These include blocking the outlets of artificial farm drains that have been engineered into place sometime in the early 1980s. Plus the practice of slightly lowering the water level in the dredge pond stress, because it probably doesn't need to be said, but this mining that does not involve level except for this protective slight lowering of the water level by about 6 millimeters. And
yeah, that which in real is negligible. And there's no alteration of the overall underlying groundwater hydrology because
dedicated to it, and it has a daily maximum equivalent pumping rate of 38 litres a second. That water is needed for groundwater, and it'll be taken from a deeper gallery in the ground than the mineral sands. It'll be taken from the sandy gravel that lies at depth below the mineral sands. But we've treated it as the same out of conservatism. That water needs to be taken for the purposes of the mine processing, for the most part, because there is a magnetic separation process as part of the processing towards a concentrate, which requires water that is less than 5 NTU in turbidity. So it needs to be clear water. And were we to take water from the dredge pond, we would have to, or the company would need to use something like lamellar filtration or the like to return groundwater quality following this being stirred up by suction dredge to 5 NTU. So that's the reason why we have a water supply, why the project has a water supply bore. I urged it to be as far away from Te Wharewhare and Lake Mananui. Turned out to be pretty much within the processing plant area, so that's why they're co-located. But that's the extractive part, which is then returned to the groundwater system through either the dredge pond or the infiltration trench. Now, the second caveat I have is that surface water, that currently small amounts of water flow within farm drains on the surface. And the farming practices of the past have linked them together along the line of these swales and then made cut-throughs across the dune ridges to Wharewhare, well, certainly to the wetlands and then the southern cut-through, and directly to Wharewhare Creek in the northern cut-through, cut-throughs. So I'll get to the discussions we had with Ngā Runanga soon. But the water management plan proposal is to block off both of those artificial farm drain cut-throughs. And the justification for that is that it is an additional or a multiple layer of protection against mining activity related surface water or mining affected stormwater ever making their way out to flooding. And we have the agreement from the regional council that those farmlands in the cut through, they, in their opinion, in terms of how they process consents initially, is not natural water or a river. So they are therefore relaxed about the preventative practice of blocking both of those cut-throughs. So those are the two caveats. There is water being taken from the ground at the plant, and there are those two blocks, and though that's the extent to which there would be a diminution of flow in the application site relative to Te Wharewhare.
As a matter of interest, how are you going to manage the surface water volumes that arise from blocking those drains?
By essentially encouraging them towards their previous mode of drainage, which was to ground. So they would go to the water table, and then depending on which side of the groundwater divide they are, they would go to their respective receptors.
So just more water in the swales until they're reached by the mining operation.
But equally, it's possible to increase the permeability of the ground strategic places, such that we can be assured that timely and full drainage is occurring.
So by that you mean infiltration basins or?
Yes. Yep. Not so aggressively infiltrating that we're taking additional contaminants down to the ground, fecal or otherwise, from farming practices, but certainly sufficient to ensure that the hydrological function is being performed through the ground rather than this artificial farm drain practice.
So they wouldn't need to be constructed in a structured way, they could be constructed as required if ponding was exceeded.
Indeed, yeah, they could be somewhat reactive rather than fully proactive. Okay. So I believe we're at 14. Discussions and negotiations with other parties, and for the sake of clarity, that's with the Potini Naitahu and their representatives. Since the submission of my evidence in chief, have resulted in strengthening of water management and water monitoring. And I apologise if this results in some confusion as to exactly what we're proposing to do with water monitoring, because it is something of a shift, of a moving feast. There's a shifting tableau there.
Yeah.
And these changes are proposed to be added to conditions dated 30 May. And in fact, we may have a subsequent update to that after that date as well, that Adrian Lowe has been working.
Does that mean we're not really, it's not sensible for us to ask you questions about the conditions until that work is complete?
I welcome any questions you have, and we'll navigate the timing issues as we go through. The ability to form a baseline of groundwater level and groundwater chemical composition in the 12 months preceding mining activity has been strengthened. It was intended, but now it's been much more certain to the parties concerned by conditioning in the proposed conditions of consent. And we're talking about a dozen new water monitoring positions as well. If we want to cover those additional monitoring positions, the permanent monitoring positions that we've proposed to be added are under tab 16, and the third or last of those three maps have in the key to identify them eastern boundary groundwater monitoring well. And you'll see those symbols and some numbering, preliminary numbering, arranged from along the eastern boundary. And to be clear, those proposed monitoring wells are to be placed along the drip line of existing vegetative margin. That is also the limit of mine disturbance that is contained within the application. So the next page I'll turn your attention to is the first one, and this relates to surface water monitoring sites. And what I've proposed with the agreement of the parties that we were discussing with is having an upstream monitoring sample on a monthly basis taken at Lake Manapua, the most convenient site being the end of Swimmers Beach Walk, and the downstream or SW2 monitoring site would be at or around the tram line, the Mananui tram line walking track footbridge, which is immediately downstream of the application site boundary, northern boundary.
So how will you know with those two monitoring sites that any change in Te Wharewhiri? Because one's measuring the lake level, isn't it? East one, and one's obviously measuring.
We're most interested in the surface water quality, the chemical composition.
Right.
We'll be analysing for things like dissolved organic carbon, hardness, and pH that they have some influence on the effect that dissolved metals have on aquatic organisms. So that's sort of your physiochemical baseline, if you like. And then we're examining for dissolved reactive phosphorus to characterise the phosphorus cycle, nitrogen, dissolved inorganic nitrogen as nitrate and and ammonia, and the dissolved metals of aluminium, copper, nickel, zinc, chromium, and somebody else can complete that list.
So does that reflect the concern of the Runanga?
Yes.
Not about water quantity, but chemical composition.
I think it would be fair to paraphrase. I hesitate to put words in their mouth, but it would be fair to paraphrase that the Runanga is most critically concerned about the water chemistry and the water quality effects of the mining activities on this Ruatapu area.
Okay.
And certainly I see from your evidence and Dr. Fitzgerald that there's obviously Sir Fitzpatrick's, where there's obviously naturally occurring issues with water quality.
There are naturally occurring variations in water chemical composition.
Yeah.
Yes. The upstream catchment is quite well preserved, you could say. There's a great deal of indigenous forest and indigenous wetlands that have not been disturbed. Small amount of forestry, but we should expect reasonable stability. But there will, of course, be a natural cycle or a range of variation that we need to characterise and obtain a baseline on that we would more intensively undertake in the 12 months preceding the onset of mining activities in surface water as well. To be honest, the prospects for being able to detect or surveil for water quality effects from the mining activities using surface water quality is quite hopeful because of the dilution relativities. The high flow rate in the creek and a relatively low flow rate that we'd expect through the groundwater.
Well, that's
system.
what I was thinking. I was thinking, well, how does that can only at best be a trigger. It cannot be an assessment of the consequence of mining.
Yes.
Because the dilution would be so enormous. You couldn't draw any confident conclusions.
The signal to noise ratio is bad.
Yeah.
In terms of being able to detect an effect of the proposed activities from the downstream surface water quality side.
The more it's a backstop, but the more fundamental reasons for your confidence relate to more basic
Indeed.
Principles of
and proximal, close by monitoring.
Yeah.
That gives me more confidence than further away, fully mixed monitoring.
Yeah.
And that is the reason why there is something of an evolution of the proposed monitoring mitigation planning that we've extended for this proposal, and that it started by looking internally to the application site in the first instance, because of the conceptual model that we developed for the site as it sits within the surrounding environment. So that's where we started. We started by doing things like defining dredge pond water management zones, which were recognising additional sensitivities to the west of the groundwater divide and in proximity to the water wells, the domestic water supplies. That's really our starting point. But I don't think we need be slavishly attached to an internalist view. That I'm very comfortable with raising our view and monitoring further afield.
Well, I suppose it's a more meaningful observation methodology with the lens of the values that are important, but that's valuable, but as I say, it's more it does require some caution and interpretation.
Yes, indeed. Signal to noise ratio is quite the problem with over-reliance on the surface water monitoring in particular. But the first page of the Eastern Boundary monitoring bores, my advice to the company was that the groundwater flows across away from the mining activity area at pretty much right angles to the boundary. So we need to have a closely spaced network of groundwater monitoring, more closely spaced than we'd initially proposed. And that I'm comfortable with, and I consider perhaps it's overblown, but perhaps it's also precisely what's required to surveil and more fully understand the interaction and the potential for interaction of mining activities and water quality effects leaving the site.
So is there going to be any triggers as a result of this monitoring that will change behaviour?
Let me answer that by moving to the next matter, which is the Water Management Commissioning Study. This is probably a new term to you. There was an initial condition which was headed with the Eastern Boundary Study, but that's now been changed to an emphasis on learning about the interaction of the mining activities particularly with the groundwater system in the first year of the activity. You will be aware from the mine path map that mining is now proposed and will be taken forward in this application henceforth to start in a block adjacent to the plant, then turn the corner in the southwest and move down the southern boundary.
Yeah, which is a concession against the idea of let's go to the most richest.
Indeed. So economically, it's not wonderful, but there's a point to it, and that it's an opportunity to learn and to develop understanding tools to anticipate water quality and water quantity effects before it matters, because all of this water management commissioning study will be on the western side of the groundwater divide. And therefore, in relative terms, in safe territory. And there is a hold point towards the end of year one of the mine plan, during which the study report, all of its data, and a updated water management mitigation and monitoring plan must be submitted to the regional council prior to, and in all likelihood undergo further checking. Now,
I'm just wondering why I'm not saying it's not a good idea, but I'm just testing it. If the central issue here is the impact of mining close to the eastern escarpment within a different watershed, what would you learn from the start of it that would inform those matters?
A lot, I believe, in my professional opinion. The conclusions that we can draw from the study within that first year are readily transportable. That is, the principles and outcomes from that study are readily and defensively transportable to the application of them along the eastern boundary where the higher sensitivity lies.
So that would mean like transmission of minerals or changes in mineral composition, that
Indeed.
the substrate is relatively uniform if different in contour.
Yeah.
And therefore you can draw reliable conclusions about those interactions.
It also allows us to draw a sort of a figurative baseline of normal mining effect on the groundwater system, which assists us with recognizing what you call normal effects on the water table and groundwater composition from more significant effects on the water table and groundwater composition. It provides us, yes, I think that sums it up. It provides us with an active baseline. We have at least 12 months of monitoring, which provides us with a passive baseline, and this provides us with an active baseline, which allows us to greater discrimination of for monitoring effects, which can be quite subtle.
So the water management commissioning study concept is to be found in conditions we're yet to see.
You have in the graphics package a map of the position of the study, and they're quite faint, but there are 6 symbols there for the tab 16. There is a symbol there for the 6 fixed monitoring study piezometers, plus there are another 3 which are already existing, but will be mined through.
Right.
They're quite close to that white object that you can see in the map towards the corner, where it turns the corner.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense.
So in the instance that, and it might be an unlikely instance, but that the study found that there was some differences in what you expected.
Yes.
What would be the response?
I think the rather than talking generalities, I could just reach out and grab an example, and it's a bit dangerous because it's slightly outside of my professional field. If, for instance, we found that the process of mining and or the process of returning tailings, that is sand that doesn't have the precious minerals in it, back into the ground, led to elevation in certain heavy metals, that would be a major effect that we'd have to deal with. But from previously undertaken projects and other mineral sand deposits, we know that co-mixing lime with the tailings at the point of deposition is a geochemical means of fixing those heavy metals and ensuring that such high concentrations are not liberated in the post-mining state. Now, Dr. Fitzpatrick may talk further to that, or you might ask him questions about that further. But that would be an example of a reasonably active or profound water management and mine management practice, which would have a high likelihood of dealing with the effect I described.
But it's hard to imagine how removing HMC would do that, in a sense, isn't it?
No, the actual mitigation is adding the lime, and the lime has a geochemical ability to cause the fixation and prevent the dissolution of metals into the groundwater. Whether it's a foreseeable effect of the processing or otherwise, we're working with a precautionary approach. We don't know exactly how
The chemistry
might swing, but we have listened to the submitters, and it doesn't just include Putini Naito. Department of Conservation has been active in the discussions as well. And
yeah, I'm just sort of hard to understand how the HMC that's taken out would have any chemical value that removing it would. So it's more likely to redistribute the process of the redistribution than the loss of those minerals themselves from the sediment.
one possibility is that the very, very fine tail end component of the grain size, you understand these mineral sands range all the way from, fine gravel all the way down to clay particles and colloids. Well, that's that extreme fine end. The miners have a term for it called slimes, and it's a colourful sort of description, but this is essentially the fine silt, the clays, and they can be substantial donors of dissolved metals. They're a repository, and they can experience conditions which cause them to dump some of their metals into solution.
Right.
So that's a possibility.
Yeah.
This is a low slimes content deposit because of its formation.
Well, that's what I thought. I thought it was
Yes.
principally sand
Yes.
with very low clay content. I can understand that, but
The bulk samples have confirmed that it's less than 1%, I understand.
yeah.
And the drill holes is an extensively drilled deposit.
And so those composition, that composition data must give a chemist a reasonable degree of confidence that that sort of process you're describing is not a major factor in this case.
Indeed, but we're being precautionary.
Can I just touch on this program of work on the first 12 months? So there's the commissioning study,
Yes.
which is essentially saying, does the model work?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the eastern boundary, there's that row of piezometers.
Yes, as part of normal monitoring for the life of the mine. Yes.
So at the end of 12 months, you'll have knowledge about does the model work as intended?
Yes.
And then on the eastern boundary, we'll have a baseline
Yes.
in terms of water quality.
Yeah.
Okay. Because one of the questions I've had is that the conditions specifically say, well, we've moved the water quantity and water quality thresholds.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was trying to work out is how you'd make adaptive management work without thresholds.
Yes, I think that the water management mitigation and monitoring plan begins to assume some importance in that instance, and it's that plan that would be subjected to an update. I'm sure that there'll be there'll be learnings coming out of the commissioning study that would merit updating the management plan. And then that plan is subject to review, probably external peer review, and recertification at a regulatory level by the consent authority. Now, I would expect that the peer reviewers would give some thought to thresholds and trigger levels, whether they're performance criteria, compliance point criteria, or whether they're target concentrations. Those sorts of thresholds. I would expect that the regional council and its peer reviewer would give some substantial thought to that, and that they would consider the recommendations that the individuals that summarised the commissioning study included in their report as well. And so the report will be due and available about 2.5 months prior to the end of year one. And the way I've seen the proposed conditioning on the commissioning study is such that there is a hold point at the end of year one at a distance of about 170 metres from the southeast corner.
So there's a possibility that, you know, if in a circumstance where it did reduce some metals going into water, you know, is that a possibility that the mine would have to stop, or is it a case that we just have to adapt?
To its logical extent, there is a possibility that it would cause it would trigger an interregnum, a pause, and that the authorities would have to be, and the peer reviewers engaged by them would have to be satisfied with the company's proposed actions before they signed off. Yes.
Okay, so that peer review is crucial in terms of allowing the mine to continue.
Indeed.
And I suppose in your professional opinion, what would be the chance of that happening? Is it, considering you talked about the low percentage of slimes in the overall resource, is that low, medium, or high, or?
Well, the question of dissolved metals deriving from slimes is just an example. I reserve my judgment on that. I'm certainly not attaching a high probability to it, but in terms of my role as expert witness, I think we have to allow for the possibility, and certainly that provides the rigour that the submitters have asked for.
So, I think it'd be helpful if you could perhaps come back to us with how you see adaptive management working. I can see there's some complicated triggers placed in the conditions, but I'm still trying to sort of conceptualise how you identified baseline along the eastern boundary. You will monitor as mining approaches and traverses that boundary.
Yes.
And presumably if the risk decreases as you move west of the divide.
Yes.
So the question that I haven't quite got clarity on is, if there's a significant deviation from the baseline water quality on the eastern boundary, what is the management actions that then to trigger?
I hope I'm not going to answer the question, but just to clarify, and just check this with Mr. Recker. As I understand it, there'll be a first-year study to ground truth the general groundwater information and data that would support the levels of confidence he's expressing about the impacts on the eastern boundary.
Yes.
In combination with that, the 8 monitoring sites will be in situ at that point.
Yes.
And have provided 12 months of data about the composition of water Is that correct?
That is correct. The other instituted or condition process as the into manage piezometer sampling well. He to weekly and then twice weekly.
And so use trigger levels as a complete rethink of the application, but as in training some further attention and so forth. And ultimately, the major block is the fact that you're not asking for consent to do the sort of material changes to whare. You're anticipating this will work. So, I mean, we don't have to worry that you're going to do the right thing, because you don't. You're immediately in the legal territory.
Indeed.
And so, I guess that's where the question's sort of directed, but it's more of a planning question, I think.
Yeah.
Because, but we do like to make sure that the technical expert who, in a sense, conceptualizes their own methodology, it is reflected in the way that the legal document, and you described earlier at the start, you said we felt that we didn't have enough narrative, which is partly true, but our primary concern, I think, is that your technical competence is expressed in language through the systems and mechanisms of the proposal conditions. And that's always a hard part of preparing an application, is getting that information loop closed.
Indeed. I can respond that I'm much more comfortable in the adaptive management approach through the use of this intensively monitored, very proximal water management commissioning study than the detailed design of finely balanced threshold concentrations in normal mine operation.
Yeah.
My preference professionally would be to get it right in that first year, and then watch it return a whole lot of very boring and uninteresting information because we've done so.
So coming to that point, because you're saying really the water commissioning study is would you imagine a tachometer?
Yes.
Sometimes in mining operations, there are movements of the tachometer to red that don't necessarily reveal anything. As soon as you put a trigger on it that says, oh, it's stopped mining, you're potentially losing a valuable source of information about natural variability or other things.
Yes.
I think that's your point about, rather than using hard limits, it's more of a systems approach. But what do the conditions as currently expressed require the commissioning study to demonstrate the confidence of that should then entitle you to go along the eastern boundary? In other words, what would the conditions say about the conclusions of the study that would demonstrate the confidence that you would have?
So I have in front of me page 22 of the graphics bundle, which is tab 10. And it is relating to proposed consent condition 26(1)(d). And in clause D, it states that no mining may occur within 170 metres of the indigenous vegetation edge on the eastern boundary identified under condition 7(1) until the consent authority has provided certification under condition 26(1)(c), which is the condition above.
Right, so that goes back to 24.1. Oh, yeah, and that's now a far more comprehensive condition than I read earlier.
Yes, sorry, things have obviously moved on and Mr. Lowe is changing things as you speak.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing that I'm aware of is that annual reviews of the water mitigation and monitoring plan are conditioned, they're required, and they have a path into the consent authority and back out again. So these, at least at an annual level of operation, there is a avenue for review and intervention by the consent authority and its compliance personnel.
Yeah. Right.
So I think that moves us on to clause 17, my summary, and I apologise for the fact that it's not very brief. More attention has been added as a result of consultation to the blocking of the farm drainage network, preventing surface outflow to Mananui wetlands and to Wharewhare during proximal mining activities until adequate passive treatment of water through the proposed shallow wetlands is demonstrated to be effective. And this is an area of responsibility that I share with Dr. Vaughan Keesing, and his area is around the shallow attenuative wetland that's appropriately speciated with wetland plants for the removal of components of water quality, such as phosphorus, nitrogen, and dissolved metals.
Will those wetlands fill up over time with sediment?
Yes, they should be expected to, because the other water quality component that they're there for is for the attenuation of any suspended sediment or turbidity in the water.
So that will fill up over time. And how long will that? That's over a long period of time or a short period of time?
So for a relatively long period of time, but once again, I defer to Dr. Keesing in terms of his ability to explain that.
Sorry, I just had a brain lapse, but are you talking about these proposed new wetlands?
Indeed, yes.
And you're happy with the RLs that are shown in that for?
They relate to approximate water levels as proposed in the wetlands, and they're approximately conforming with the mean water table height at that time.
So eventually when they fill up, it will just be a channel, or it will just flow over that.
Yeah, there'll be
Much like
an outflow weir.
Much like the existing drains, I suppose.
Yes.
Yeah.
There'll be an outflow weir. Certainly the drains are for farming are designed for higher velocity clearance of flows, and these are designed for low velocity, large surface area contact clearance of surface flows. But I'd stress that it is my expectation that the groundwater and the water table will do the heavy lifting in terms of overall drainage of the post-mining site.
All right, well, why don't we break for morning tea? So we'll come back in 15 minutes and we'll think about everything over a cup of tea. Lots of digest, thank you.
Thank you. It's just me.
Technically,
Ask Kate to increase the temperature if you want. All right, so we'll resume.
Yes, and I believe we can resume at the conclusion on the last page, clause 21, because I have covered all of the foregoing clauses. I think that this application and its future water-related environmental performance has essentially three legs to the stool, three principal elements. First is that the proposed mining avoids surface water. It's not venturing into the surface water realm. The farm drains really are superficial drainage, and they're not surface water bodies. The part of the deposit and land and WMS ownership that heads towards the wetland and Lake Manapua is left out of the application. We're essentially just talking about the farmed land area, so it avoids surface water. The suction dredge floating upon the ambient water table is a principal element. We're not talking about dewatering. I know I've been before you in previous applications where we've talked about a sand mining process which did involve dewatering, and that's simply not the case here. It's got a neutral setting. And future water management measures, a preparatory trial and intensive monitoring to provide observation are deployed to ensure the environmental performance is in accordance with my technical guidance that is available at this time. And for these reasons, I consider on the water side that the effects are less than minor.
Yeah, a few questions. Thank you. I've answered a lot of my questions, but I'll just turn to my list if it would come up. So with the aquifer testing, so you state in paragraph 52 of the evidence that that was exclusively in the muddy gravel deposits. Well, how does that affect the accuracy of the pumping tests?
Yeah, in some ways, being specific to that about that makes a rod for my own back, because I have to explain a complicated part of hydrogeology. We could have attempted to run an aquifer test in the mineral sand itself, but sustaining a consistent, strong flow of water to make a meaningful perturbation in the water table would have been really challenging. So instead, we placed the screen of the bore, the pumping bore that was used for the 3 tests, into the more permeable sandy gravel, which is in hydraulic communication with the mineral sand. The screen was set below the level of the mineral sand in that sandy gravel. And then we observed the response to doing a standard aquifer test at remote observation bores, piezometers. They were spaced at 10, 15 and 40 meters away from the pumping bore that was used in the aquifer test in the mineral sand. And with those observations and the consistent standard methodology for running a pumping test, which is common to all aquifer tests, we used a computer model to deconvolute the response curves and provide permeability coefficients for both the sandy gravel that we were pumping from and the overlying mineral sand above that. So that's the explanation for the difference in the pumping site to what would normally be undertaken. In addition to that, and separate to it, we carried out what's called slug tests. Now, these are smaller scale, brief displacement tests, and they give us an approximate coefficient of permeability of the mineral sand. And these confirmed the results of the more accurate aquifer tests. And in addition to that, the project undertook trench pumping and injection tests, where we looked at the ability of the mineral sand to sustain pumping from it, from an excavated trench, a temporary trench, and to receive water back into a similarly excavated trench. And we observed the decline in the pump trench and the mounding of the water level in the injected or infiltrated trench. And those tests also confirmed the certainly better than order of magnitude values for the coefficient of permeability.
So in summary, you use 3 different methodologies, all confirming the same thing.
Yes. And the first one was a response to an awkward, difficult hydrogeological setting.
Yes, right. And just turning to the hydraulic gradient, and we've touched on this before. What sort of level of certainty do you have that that hydraulic gradient will be maintained away from the stream?
You'll have seen in my evidence on figure 4 an example of a groundwater contour map. And so it's a composite, just like a topographic map of the water table surface. Now, that was based on the investigation monitoring piezometers that were installed and then dipped on the same day to create the data. And it was all referenced to sea level, to the same height datum. We are conditioned to have a denser network of groundwater level monitoring, and therefore we will have a higher resolution groundwater monitoring map of the pattern of groundwater gradients and the sympathetic groundwater flows and velocities. So that's the straightforward answer to your question, I hope.
So you've said, I suppose in summary, so you said you don't have more monitoring sites.
Yes.
But I suppose the question really was, what certainty do you have that it won't draw that gradient away?
That mining activities.
Yeah, the hydraulic gradient, as you've said, is going to be orientated to you want to maintain the flow to the west and not the east into the stream. And so the question was, what level of confidence do you have that's?
I have a high level of confidence.
Right.
Yes. It would be a significant warning matter if that groundwater flow pattern changed in a significant way. The mining activity will cause a very localized flattening of the water table and its immediate surrounds. And this, when I was talking about normal operational effects, that's really what I'm talking about there, because the act of mining creates a void of a dredge pond, which has got infinite permeability. So infinite permeability waterscape, if you like, has a flat water surface. Porous waterscape has an inclined water surface if it's flowing, because of the handbrake that's dragging on the movement of water through that material. With us having a dredge pond directly alongside a point of observation, we would expect to see a small drop as it comes directly alongside because of that flattening effect that would create an infinite permeability space there, and so that it's flattened the water table from there to there in terms of the size of the dredge pond.
Okay. With the infiltration trench, so there's some potentially turbid water going into that trench. Does that create a risk that that could get into the wetland or the stream?
Well, the first part of that response is that the infiltration trench, this is the operational infiltration trench in the southwest.
Yep.
That is in the westerly catchment and not anticipated to have any potential to be able to flow towards the Wharewhare or Lake Manapua.
Okay.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that it is well known that mineral sands of this type have a strongly absorptive filtering effect on turbidity suspended in water. So if you have groundwater which has turbidity within it, it really can't flow very far before it has to drop that suspended sediment load all the way down to clay-sized particles, that are really quite small, or even colloids. Colloids don't go more than, and colloids are just colour particles. So it's very, very fine.
It's like a natural filter.
Yes.
Okay. And just turning now to the pit, you talked about there was a statement, I think, in 105 in the evidence. You talk about a high intensity rainfall period, and there'd be enough space in the pit.
Yes.
To accommodate that high intensity rainfall period, so it doesn't spill out of the pit.
Yes.
Is there a possibility that it's already with a wet period, which is common over here, that it's already high?
Indeed. I have gone through the relative geometries, and there are very few parts of the mine path where even in high water table conditions that there is not that at least 2 meters of that airspace above the water table to the top of the first lift of the pit, of the dredge pond surrounds. So the sand has a high capacity to infiltrate stormwater, and the airspace of the dredge pond has an additional capacity to absorb that, and high water table conditions do not substantially erode that airspace.
Right. So if the water table was at its maximum due to a period of high rainfall, that 2 metres of free water, if you like, that doesn't fill up with
Well,
with
it could.
rain?
It could. If you had a 1 in 100 year downpour, you could have it bouncing up to that, and then declining as a recession curve following it. But miners that are employed by mining companies such as this one are well adapted to the vagaries of weather and the limitations that they impose on their operation. They have a good sense of when high rainfall is going to impinge on their ability to continue work. But there is no situation where I anticipate that we will have stormwater leaving the dredge pond area. And in fact, it's an important sort of depot centre for receiving stormwater, such as may fall in the immediate artificial catchment around the dredge pond.
And so going back, if there was a 100-year event, it would exceed that and leave the dredge pond, wouldn't it?
No, I still don't think it would do that, but it would certainly, it could get in the way of the miners to continue their activities, so that the ability for them to carry out their usual tasks and functions would have to be suspended for a period. That's the only real impact that I can anticipate from stormwater falling in the immediate vicinity of the dredge pond.
Okay.
Just to provide some context, in your site visit, I'd like you to keep an eye out for any stormwater channels, culverts, swales, apart from the ones that sit in the natural depressions that you see there. Any sign of flow across the plain towards the Tasman Sea, apart from those farm drains that have been cut into the land, there isn't really. This piece of the plain has taken care of its own drainage. There are no records of flooding on State Highway 6, surface flooding due to stormwater building up around the road.
Okay. Just moving on to talk about the effects on drinking water wells, and that's been raised in the submitters, and I think one of the submitters said their wells run dry in summer. So is it possible there could be a sort of a scarcity of groundwater during a dry period, and the top-up bore could make that situation worse or not?
You'll have seen the map with the position of the top-up bore and the private domestic water supplies. That we have a theoretical potential lowering of I think it's over the 880 metres between the two. It's projected to be about 10 centimetres or so. So the theoretical projections are often, well, I would consider them quite conservative. They ignore a lot of factors that would actually lessen the height of the effect. In that quantitative sense, I don't think there is a tangible effect that's going to be exerted on those domestic wells.
So even if it was a dry summer and groundwater levels were as low as they get, it's not going to make any difference, is that correct?
I see where you're going. So my understanding of those domestic wells is that they have a maximum depth of about 8 meters. And the construction and configuration of those wells, there's a balance between putting additional depth into the well and the length of the screen, that's the filter section of the well, to almost always at the bottom of the well itself, and where you place the pump intake. And some wells are equipped with surface pumps, which are limited by the suction lift limit of about 6 meters, and some are electric submersible pumps, which aren't subject to that suction lift limit. So there are internal dynamics related to the construction and condition of the wells, which might mean that in extended dry periods, they experience difficulties. And then really you just have to consider whether the relatively small additional effect of that top-up well is enough to break the camel's back, as it were. I don't think that will occur. I think that the recorded groundwater variation that we have from monitoring shows that there is a relatively restricted range of fluctuation in the water table, even in response to quite dry, extended dry periods. They don't really get droughts here, but they have periods of up to 40 days of little rain, but that's the limit of it. I believe they're in safe territory.
Okay.
And you will have seen, or at least I hope you've seen, that there is some conditioning around providing additional certainty to those domestic water supplies for their continuance, both in terms of quality and in terms of quantity.
Mm. And just in terms of quality, is there any conditions that sort of notify the downgrading domestic wells? Is it appropriate to notify? Because I know there's testing of the water quality at the site, goes to a lab, they come back and you make decisions, sort of a 5-day period or something in it. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is, would it be appropriate to notify those downgrading bore owners straight away at the first results of a reading over the guidelines, so that they could take their own precautions?
It is entirely appropriate. I believe, and I stand corrected by wiser heads in planning and law, but I believe there's an obligation on any discharge consent holder to notify downgradient or downstream water suppliers in any instance where there's a risk of their discharge having an effect on that water supply. And that's contained within the National Environmental Standard drinking water source. And so I believe there's a statutory central government responsibility via the RMA to that effect in any case.
So considering, and this might be a question for the planners or the lawyers, but considering that's an existing statutory requirement, then maybe that's an advice note making sure that is the procedure if there is a change.
Yes.
Then they are notified that they can take their own precautions. Because I think the way I read the conditions was that you do some monitoring, there might be a detection of a higher reading, then you go away and analyse that a bit more. And you spend some time thinking about what to do. And it just struck me that in the meantime, people were drinking that water, and that they may wish, if they'd known, to do something odd, to have an alternative supply. I
would expect WMS to be fully aware of that legislative requirement. And again, I stand corrected if that's not, if they don't see that requirement in that way, I would. And there are conditions, as you've said, in the proposed conditions of consent that seek to have response reports and reviews of that, and certain actions that take place up to and including provision of alternative water supply, perhaps as a temporary measure.
Yeah.
That would serve to provide some additional security to those water supplies.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. But yeah, as I said before, it did strike me that the neighbours weren't being notified straight away.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something that someone wants to come back to us on as to how they intend to deal with.
Yeah.
But that's it from me. Thank you very much for answering my questions on that.
Thank you. I have no questions. Thank you very much. All right, well done.
No, got Dr. Fitzgerald. Is Ben okay with making copies? Is it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stop their chips.
No copies.
Oh, welcome.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very well.
Good. So, referring to your summary statement.
Yes, and I don't have much to say. Skip to 4.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand my role in this application is to review the water quality assessment of Mananui Solutions, effectively the work of Jens Recker. And then just to my summary, key to my evidence is that the concentrations of contaminants estimated to potentially reported to Whare Creek are low and pose low risk of effects on freshwater species. Let's flesh that out a little bit so I feel like I'm contributing.
Might as well.
Mr. Recker talked about the flow of groundwater to the creek, and he estimated about a 0.5% dilution. My model was more conservative than that. I estimated about a 1%, 1.1%, at a mean annual flow of about 775 litres per second, and a groundwater discharge of about 9 litres per second. So I've taken a very conservative approach. I was actually looking for something to find because I like to find them out sometimes. So I've looked pretty closely at this. And also the water chemistry, I took a very conservative approach to my model as well. Whereas I really just took the worst case concentrations that had appeared in the testing and applied them to the hydrology of Mr. Recker. And when I did that, I found exactly what I've said there, the concentrations of contaminants that are reporting are low and low risk of effects to aquatic biota. There's something I thought about at 2 o'clock in the morning. I thought I'd like to mention because it really increases my comfort in this application. I started to think in terms of the shake testing that have been done, some of the geochemical testing that have been done. I started to say to myself, where is this aluminium coming from in the water column? And what does that mean for a fish or an organism like that? And the way the toxicity of these metals works, as you tells, where, is that they can attach themselves to the gills of these organisms. And if there's a metal like nickel, zinc, or aluminum stuck to the gill of a fish, it blocks other things getting in, such as oxygen. And that's a very common mechanism for the effects, chronic and acute effects on organisms. And then I thought about the analysis that was being done on the dissolved metal fraction for, say, aluminium, and there were various concentrations that came forward. And I said to myself, they are actually not dissolved metals that are going to report to the gill. What they are is they're tiny, tiny, tiny little bits of garnet that pass through the filtration system, which is a 0.45 micron system. So colloidal material, fine crystalline material is going through the filter that differentiates between a total aluminium test and a dissolved aluminium test. It's reporting as something that's bioavailable, but it's not. And so I'm not disparaging the analytical work that's being done, but it gives me another degree of comfort that the small amount of metals we do see actually aren't bioavailable. I just thought I'd add that to a block thought.
So to summarize that, what you're saying is that in the data set, there are samples, or the sampling shows presence of metals like aluminium that would not be bioavailable in the water column in a fit for a fish. Is that what you're saying?
My opinion.
Yeah.
It's not like a classic hard rock mine where it's perhaps pyritic and there's lots of interesting chemistry going on. They crush this ore and they add chemicals and out comes the good stuff, and with it some other things that are very labile is the word we use in chemistry, very able to get around in water. But that's not what's happening.
Yeah, it's a word I've typically associated with mood swings. Label.
So when you say it's not bioavailable, it's potentially the fish will be in it and be absorbed in this in this fine particles, but it's not being stuck in their gills, it's just going through them. Is that right?
The fish will it'll drink the water, obviously it'll end up in its stomach, but that's not the mode of toxicity, that's not the mechanism of toxicity for metals on a fish.
Right.
There's very few metals actually that.
So how does it actually, what does it mean when it's bioavailable? What does it mean when it's getting into how does it actually get into the fish? If another substance.
The mode of toxicity is it attaches to the gill. That's the main method. So it's actually not getting into the fish. It's stopping other stuff getting into the fish. There's very few elements that operate differently. None of them are present here. So yeah, as I said, the two hands thought. So point 6, paragraph 6. Also cares the proposed mining operation includes a strong water quality monitoring program, which gives me confidence that the unlikely event of any negative trends in groundwater is detected, then they'll be averted before reaching the creek. And I have a bit of an update here from a meeting last night that there'll be some questions perhaps after what I've said, but you can direct them to Mr. Lowe or Ms. Booker. The Ngātahu had sought a fairly intense monitoring program. And I do think that twice weekly is a lot, which is what's on the table now. Twice weekly is a lot. It's a highly cultural significant area. I'm not diminishing that at all. But if you think about how groundwater moves through the ground and daylights into the creek, it's very slow. And if you're going to spot anything in groundwater, it won't be on a daily basis. And won't be on a weekly basis. You'll see changes in water quality over a longer period of time. Nevertheless, I accept 2 weeks twice a week is conservative. It was Mr. Lowe's brainwave last night that the company could take on a student, a local person, to do a master's during the water commissioning phase and actually get out there in the field and build a little laboratory and do the testing daily, which I think is from an academic point of view, I think it's excellent. It's a great idea and it would add to a wonderful database for the region. Because I think it's a good idea. But as I say, Ms. Brooke and Adrian Lowe can inform you more on that.
Yeah, I just had a worry that that you gather information that generates more noise than signal. And you get lost in the trees. I would have thought these have to demonstrate as trends, with enduring trends, as opposed to just, you know, variations in the natural system.
There is a sense that there would be information for information's sake,
Yeah,
which I don't agree with either. But my point is that at least there was a willingness to do more than is required. The Jens recommended.
having said that, from a cultural perspective, as kaitiaki, you might say it is OTT, but at least no one can say we weren't having a very close watching brief. So in a sense, it's has that value of showing an intense concentration on what's going on, a focus.
Yes, and a respect.
Yeah.
So
But I don't want to write conditions that then end up making the whole thing unfeasible, you know, in terms of knee-jerk reactions to things. I was explaining to the fellow commissioners, it's a bit like saying, if you wanted to control a young person's use of a car, you could say, don't go beyond 4,000 revs per minute, otherwise the car stops, which could be dangerous and unnecessary. Whereas you're more likely to say, if you are continuously at 4,000 revs per minute for a long period of time, that's not acceptable. You know what I mean? It's a sort of homespun idea.
that analogy makes my mind go in all sorts of places. I'm asking, what sort of car? Is it my son? Is it my daughter? That's not helpful for me, actually.
Okay. I'll keep quiet.
So I've just got a question, Dr. Fitzpatrick, about the conservativeness of your estimates. So you based it on 1% inflow to the creek. We heard from Mr. Wright this morning that he thinks the groundwater from the site's only about 0.5% of the actual intake. And of course, it's ultimately conservative, isn't it? Because what this proposal is that there's going to be no inflow from the mine, from the pit water into the creek. So if you understand that, I'm saying that you're assuming that there will be some inflow to the creek, but the proposal is to make sure that mine water does not go into the creek. Is that right?
Well, no surface water discharge.
Yeah.
But certainly, Mr. Reckler makes the point that, yes, there is groundwater movement still. He talked about that divide, and my eyes glass over a little bit with hydrology, but there is a divide, and yes, there's definitely groundwater that will report into that creek base. So, but no surface water, which makes us a little bit different.
Yeah.
You know, unlike say Barrytown, distinct surface water discharge. This isn't really, and that's that gives me great room for cover, really, to be honest.
Okay.
So that's all you wanted to say? The conclusions speak for themselves? Or?
I think so. I'll finish with 10, so I finish on a bit of a flurry. I also concluded the potential adverse effects of mine process water on aquatic biota in the creek are appropriately managed by the conditions of the consent, which include triggers for assessing water quality. Such effects will be avoided. So triggers are a big friend. They trigger thinking, they trigger possibly action, but they're not hard and fast rules. We're not at that stage. We've matured, and I'm sure Mr. Lowe will come up with a set of conditions that do the job.
In your model, do you, with the variables that you've inputted in terms of flows and contribution and that, done sensitivity testing to say, 2 standard deviations from the highest reported samples. What does that mean? In other words, the sensitivity testing. Is that possible, or is that done?
It's definitely possible. We're not at that stage. And I think this is where the commissioning project is really important, to collect a little bit more data. So we would be at that stage. Again, Mr. Ricker talked about the signals to noise, and I think it's very important just to make this point. It's the baseline water quality needs to be really carefully thought through, because we have baseline water quality now. And if you're looking for a change in the baseline, where do you look at that from? Do you look at it from a median of the signal to noise, or do you look at it from a maximum of the signal to noise? So that needs to be worked through. That can only come, I think, in the commissioning stage. I don't see us being there yet to talk about that sensitivity.
Right, so you see the study in achieving the objectives that are described in the conditions would have to tackle the problem of that sort of analysis
It is a bit of
in order to reach the appropriate levels of confidence.
Look, the modelling I've done is conservative, and I'm very happy that on a broad scale, I can say there's not going to be a fix. What that means is we come into a monitoring program, how we could possibly pick up any changes. That's going to require a little bit more thought.
But that's appropriately done through the certification process. It's not something that we would. It
I don't
requires a
think
study.
I don't think you need to consider it now, because there's nothing to see, actually. Really, very little to see.
Yeah, just one question about zinc. So you know that zinc levels may exceed the guidance value. I think you've got a 0.0042 as the guidance value. But also state that a recently drafted update of that guide provides for an increased value, 0.012, at the model creek hardness and dock concentrations. I assume that's dissolved. Okay, yep, and pH levels. So I just want to understand what that actually means. So is that saying that the higher levels of zinc can be assimilated with different hardness and dissolved carbon? Is that what they're saying?
That's exactly what it's saying. So a traditional approach to understanding metals toxicity to aquatic organisms was to just look at the metals concentration without any consideration of what we call toxic modifying factors, TMFs.
Right.
Now, in the 1970s, 1980s, the US, particularly in the US, the EPA, they started to do more and more work on that. And they came to an understanding that hardness was an ameliorating factor. Does that in a couple of ways. Hardness is basically a measure of calcium and magnesium, but it also comes along with carbonate. It's going to get a little complex, and carbonate can bind to zinc and make it less bioavailable. So that's one way in which hardness will work. The other way hardness works is if you've got calcium and magnesium in your system, well, that sticks to the gill of the fish. And so it stops the metals sticking to the gill of the fish. It's quite a complex system, actually, and I shouldn't belittle it, but that's probably the best way of explaining it. Now, since then, particularly in the last 10 years, there's come an appreciation for other toxic modifying factors, and one of them is dissolved organic carbon. And that acts in a different way. It's what we call chelates. The word chelate is from the claw of a crab. It means to grab. So the dissolved organic carbon is basically humic acids, fulvic acids, which can grab the metal and stop it getting to the fish of the gill. So hardness, DOC, also pH is now much more recognised as a factor in toxicity as well. That's to do with the carbonate balance.
So the in-stream conditions,
Yes.
I suppose,
Yes.
dictate how that level of zinc or its effect.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You know, you can have a system with very low zinc, but it ends up being a system that is potentially more risk to, say, a fish, because it's very low in hardness and very low in DOC. And you can have more zinc in another system that's perhaps got low hardness but high DOC, and that's this system actually. Mm-hmm. It's not particularly hard, the water, but it has got a lot of DOC, as a lot of West Coast rivers do. You've seen it yourself. And so, yeah, it's not trivial, actually. And that's why these guidelines are not trivial that are coming out, with 3 of them that were drafted last year, zinc, nickel and copper, by ANZIC. And I've done submissions on all three of them, but they're not straightforward. It's not an easy topic to work through. And that's why there are people like Dr. Keesing, who is in the streams and in the rivers and can see and understand with his own eyes what's going on. So that's why we work together.
So something ultimately that the actual guidance value you're saying is going to be subject to an upgrade or a revision, which changes.
It is being subject to a revision. I could talk about
But
this
it's
for a very long time.
still ongoing, still going through the process.
It's a draft, and so I, as a scientist, I don't consider that as being relevant to even talk about, to be honest. I was in sort of in two minds as to whether to put that in. I put it in because I thought, what if I get asked about this stuff? I don't know, but I put it there to be transparent, and so you understand the flux that can be water quality guidelines and how they make their way into New Zealand law.
Yes, I do. It's all your fault. But just as an interesting point around like species, it would seem that like particular fish species exist in a range of environments, all of which have different qualities in terms of water quality and water composition, and yet they survive and populate. So there is a sense in which there is an inherent in the organism a capability to have variations in those things and still operate.
Yeah, 100% correct.
Yeah, and the only way you can really start saying a change is adverse is by some demonstrable decline in organism function.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone off water quality guidelines a little bit, to be honest. And what I much prefer is a site-specific approach. So having a water quality guideline for zinc that depends on a Papua New Guinean species of green algae, which is what the draft guidelines have got. To me, that's just bananas.
Yeah.
But what is appropriate is for the biologists of this world to get into this community. And so my questions to Dr. Keesing were, what lives in this system? Does Polymopergus live there? Yes, it does. Well, that's a really good indicator species. So rather than setting a numeric guideline on a metal, we can, I think, be smarter and just keep an eye on the health of the ecosystem.
That's what I wonder. I wonder whether biomonitoring, some ways,
Well, you and I should make a submission, sir.
is a more accurate way of measuring effect than just numerical numbers, which, I mean, there may be fish of a particular species. I agree with the most sensitive being a useful indicator, but down the road there might be these species that are in there that are coping with those conditions perfectly well.
Well, they do adapt after all. Yes. No, lots to think about, but perhaps I've obviously provided some ways to live.
Is it, I mean, that's still relevant to this, isn't it? Instead of having these triggers, which are, based on how some blue-green algae relax in Papua New Guinea to zinc, that would actually be more appropriate to have in-stream monitoring going on as to what's actually happening.
I think it's a gold standard. I do. Right. I really do.
Because that's not what's proposed, though, is it? In terms of
there's practicalities, though. These water quality standards are generic across all of New Zealand and Australia, and we know what a different group of species they are over there. So
the problem with that sort of monitoring is it's just so long. You need long data set. It's so expensive to administer. But I guess I make the point. I mean, we're not in a space where this would be necessary because of the things that Mr. Recker has talked about and you have. But it does require some degree of humility to acknowledge that some of these triggers are actually, again, potentially noise.
Yes, I agree, sir. And I think you can get carried away, and site-specific monitoring is expensive, but I think if you're smart, you do it when you need to.
Anyway, that's useful, thank you.
No, thank you.
All right,
We're going to move online for the next couple of people.
yeah,
Got Mr. Hurley and Ms. Little.
Can you hear us?
yes, thank you.
I can hear you as well. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Hurley. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks.
So you've got a summary statement that you wanted to address, is that the plan?
I think Ms. Booker had suggested that you'd just ask questions, but I'm happy to read the summary statement if you prefer.
Yes, in terms of timeframes, I had suggested to Mr. Hurley and Ms. Woodley that they can just be available for questions.
Well, I might kick off. Do you have the cross sections for the site available to you?
I've got the graphics bundle. Which particular cross sections are you referring to?
Just trying to find it.
5 pages, I think.
5 pages into what tab?
Oh, it's tab 5 for you, but in terms of the graphics and all
Tab
online,
5, yep.
just 5 pages.
Tab 5. Tab 5 of the graphics bundle.
Yeah, unfortunately the PDF version doesn't have tabs in, but is this the predominantly green south, central and north cross sections?
Yeah, have you got an outline function in your PDF reader?
I have, but I couldn't follow it to find the tabs, sorry.
Oh,
But yeah, if it's those,
Yeah.
if they're Yen's is green cross sections, I've got them in front of me.
Correct. So if you look at, say, for example, the southern figure, you see the eastern boundary of the mining.
Yes.
Sorry, actually try the northern. You've got quite a significant rise before you get to Wharewhare or Mahiniapua Creek. You see that?
Yes.
And there's currently vegetation on that escarpment.
Yes.
Correct? And
Yes.
as I understand it, you're proposing to mine 10 meters distance from the edge of the vegetation. Is that right?
Mining up to the drip line of the vegetation on the Te Wharewhare
Yeah.
line.
So do you know where that would be approximately relative to that contour?
I assume that it's got that the eastern mining boundary is roughly at the point. It looks about right from my visiting on the site.
Right. So it's 10 meters from that point that you get into a mining strip?
Right on the drip line.
Yeah. So I guess my question is this. Is the 10 meters typically running from the lowest point of the escarpment, or is it proposed to, sometimes does it run into the escarpment itself so that you're actually
No, it never takes. So if you're saying that the escarpment is the drop to Mahiniapua Creek,
yeah,
then no, it never intersects that escarpment that I'm
Right.
aware of. I believe
Right.
it just that the veg comes up to the top of the escarpment and a little bit of a spillover to across
Yeah.
the crest, and then there's then the drip line of the trees will take it a little further towards the mine area.
right. So in my homespun analysis, I would imagine a greater risk of failure if you are taking an edge off that escarpment than not. That's the purpose of my question, is really to understand in a physical sense whether, because the bottom of that escarpment in a sense operates as a buttress or a
Yes.
support.
Yes,
And if you're going to shave off part of that, my question is, does that affect the stability of the escarpment?
I think it would improve the stability of the escarpment if we reduce the height of it. If that's what you mean by chopping the top off. So if our cut came through from the mine pond and daylighted out onto the escarpment face, that would be reducing the height of the escarpment and it would be more stable in that condition.
Counterintuitive to me.
That's what it's saying. What you're saying, to summarise, he's saying the higher something is, the more unstable it is. So if it's reduced in height, there's less chance of it collapsing.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, it's because the driving force behind any slope stability issue is the weight of soil up at the top of the slope.
My question.
So it's not proposed to go into the escarpment, so your question remains relevant.
Right, okay. So that's the escarpment.
Yeah.
They're not proposing to cut off that. My question is, does it ever get to a point where it's against the better of the escarpment?
No, okay.
And the answer is no.
So thanks. I don't think that's the question.
I think I see.
So if you look at the northern cross section.
Yep.
And you see to the right of the pointer of eastern mining boundary,
Yes.
you see a contour which is a relatively narrow mound, if I can use that homespun idea.
Yeah.
See that?
Yes. Yes.
My assumption is that that is the contour showing the eastern escarpment. Is that correct?
Yes. It's the eastern. Well, yeah, the eastern beach ridge.
Yeah.
It becomes an escarpment where it falls
Right.
to the creek.
And my question is it your understanding that the mine boundary never how does it interface with that escarpment? What's your understanding?
My understanding is that the top of the 2-to-1 batter, or the 27-degree cut batter, will be roughly where that eastern mining boundary pointer goes. So the hump, the highest crest, will still remain.
Right. And so from where that arrow point is, there is a 2-to-1 batter.
Yes.
And you're satisfied that that 2-to-1 batter is sufficient, if retained, to support the escarpment?
Yes.
And
subject to review prior to getting along to that boundary.
right, so you need to review that at that point. And how does do you understand how the 2-to-1 is achieved in a mining sense?
To be honest, not quite. They might have to. I can understand how they do it with the dredge. You can easily make sure so that the dredge will be sucking along a face that's perpendicular to this boundary, and you could easily control the location of the suction on its right-hand side as the machine progresses along the eastern boundary. You could easily control that location of the suction dredge so it doesn't exceed the doesn't violate the 2-to-1 batter, you
So
might.
is there, carry on.
So, well, and then you'd have material falling into the pit to feed the machine. But the material that falls into the pit, like the actual excavation face, is likely to stand a lot steeper than that 2-to-1. So there might be a need for a bit of trimming with an excavator to get that batter in the right place.
How does that work with a dredge system where the water table is to be retained, and there's a dredge on the top of the water just working through? How does that practically work?
I'm not an expert in the dredging system, but I would see that dredge, as I understand it, the dredge sucks along at the bottom of the mineralization layer, so it's working along at approximately RL0, which is marked on the, or it's working along that grey zone in the cross sections, and then it expects the face in front of it to collapse towards it. So you can effectively cut the toe of the batter with the dredge, and then you've got to rely on collapse to make the shape of the batter coming towards you. But if you're working along and you're cutting at the toe of your 2-to-1 batter and the ground is not collapsing into the trench, then you'll need to encourage it. And you can encourage it with a digger bucket that is set up to trim at the 2-to-1 batter. That can be GPS controlled.
Right. So I'm just trying to conceptualize how this. So you're saying the dredge itself, which is actually working underwater, is causing a part of it to collapse to get the 2-to-1 batter. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it'll get a batter, probably steeper than 2-to-1.
Mr. Chase is also here if you require assistance. Who's the expert?
Okay, well, I might get Mr. Chase to explain it to me, because it all feels a little bit counterintuitive with my experience as a child with sandcastles and water, to see how that would work in a way that didn't potentially create a risk of collapse. But do you agree that this requires a high degree of operator skill to make sure that that's achieved or not?
Either a high degree of operator skill or a high degree of technology. And the technology certainly exists to say that from a GPS unit mounted in a digger, or a pair of GPS receivers mounted on a digger, you can, and various sensors on how long the arm is reaching out, you can program a machine to cut to a 2-to-1 batter, or to a certain depth, or a certain boundary.
That makes sense. It must be right that you can program these things to. I guess the condition of being underwater might add an additional complication.
Not to that sort of automation.
Right.
It does. It does have a. We've all seen stuff collapsing as you dig underwater. But and I had this discussion with Mr. Recker not so long ago, that a lot of that is caused by not just movement of the sand, it's sort of sucked out by if you're digging a test pit and you're trying to dig it vertically for a start, and as you pull from below the water table, the sides will collapse in. That's caused for two reasons. One is that you're trying to cut it vertically, and the other is that as the bucket is pulled out of the hole, it creates suction that pulls the sand into the hole, and that spreads.
And what do you say, you said that you would have to have a look at it at the time.
Yes.
What would you anticipate your process being, and at what point in time would that process occur?
It's something that should start as the well, right at the start, really. I mean, if there is going to be a problem with major collapsing to the side, then we'll be able to see it as soon as the machine starts digging. But when it's getting along that southern boundary, I think I expect the company to be looking at the behaviour of that batter all along that boundary. Is it we're cutting to a 10-metre buffer? If it's routinely dropping chunks out of that 10-metre buffer, they should be investigating the cause and, if necessary, adjusting the process.
So in that first cut, the first year of excavation, you would need information about the behaviour of the substrate to inform your assessment of the risks to the eastern boundary.
Yeah. Someone should be logging what's seen in the face, and yeah, recording the performance of the batter and recording weather events and
Right.
seismic events and anything.
What sort of logging would you describe? What would you expect a log to contain? Is there a standard?
Well, a geologist, I don't think I could define a standard, but they'd be looking for changes in the ground conditions that cause problems. So if you're finding lenses of loose sand, that might be more inclined to run, or mineralization might be inclined to bind up and not and try and stand up a lot straighter than the rest of the batter does. So that could be just a series of photographs, really, with some notation.
So it wouldn't make any sense for you to come down and watch it, but someone like the monitoring manager could take a photographic essay of showing relevant information.
Yes, yeah, you'd pick up a lot from
by you.
Yes, well, probably with a bit of help from someone on site. I'm sure they will have some good geological knowledge on site, and things like colour in the exposed cut would tell you something if you relate it to performance as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you may have to revise distances, but the objective of that exercise is to provide you with confidence that the predictions you're making for the eastern boundary are valid, correct?
Yes.
So one of the benefits of the first run being not on the eastern boundary is that it provides you with better information on which to be confident that your predictions are accurate for the eastern boundary.
Yes, that's correct.
And do you appreciate that the eastern escarpment is a highly valuable riparian margin with significant ecological values?
Yes, I do. Yep.
And that your predictions are appropriately conservative, so that there isn't a material risk of harm.
Yes, I believe so. And again, subject to them being reviewed at the time. It may be that further testing is warranted. If we're starting to see bigger variations in the ground conditions than are accounted for in the testing done so far, then it might make sense to do further sampling along that eastern boundary before you get to it. At the moment, I don't see that that's necessary, but that can be a decision for whoever's doing the geotechnical review at the time.
So at the water, so you would, in addition to the commissioned water study, you would recommend in the first year a geotechnical assessment of the experience of the first cut to
Yes,
be provided to certify, for the council to certify that the methodology for the eastern boundary is appropriate.
yes, I think that's kind of what's envisaged in the condition. Is it 7.8?
7.8, yeah.
It probably is. Problem with is that I'm not quite over the conditions. So we'll have to work through that, but that's useful to just talk that through. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, just a follow-up question there, Mr. Hurley. So when you're determining the appropriate pit wall geometry, is there a level of risk that's included in that calculation? For instance, what happens in a seismic event? What type? What's the magnitude of the seismic event? Is it 1 in 5? Is it 1 in 10? Is it 1 in 100?
It's a one. So the performance has been modelled so far with a 1 in 25-year earthquake event. And you get a reduced factor of safety on the slope in those conditions, but you don't get failure. I think we're running about 1.1 as a factor of safety versus 1.3 under static conditions.
So would it be, given the sensitivity of the stream to the east, I mean, is it appropriate for the conditions to state what level of risk is included in that calculation so that the consent authority can be assured that there's not a reduced level of risk embodied in those calculations?
So what? How would you want to express that?
I suppose what I'm suggesting is that the conditions could specify the level of risk that's embodied in the geotechnical calculations for the stability of the pit wall. So they'd say, you're taking a 1 in 25-year event.
Yes, you could take. Yep, you could say the pit wall should have a factor of safety exceeding 1 in a 1 in 25-year event. That would be reasonable. I'd go back to my report. I think we had a minimum of 1.1.
So that might be something you may wish to consider further in terms of if you're proposing that and what it is. Because it seems to me that it's an environmental risk if it did create a stability issue for the stream.
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question through the commissioners of Mr. Hurley? Should I ask him directly? Mr. Hurley, in your recommended condition 7.7, you've set out recommended better slopes.
Yes.
For 7 degrees. Can you confirm that your factor of safety in terms of the earthquake risk was factored into those calculations for those betters?
Yes, I can.
So I think the way it's been approached is we've built that in already conservatively into the requirements and then built in a test program to ensure that the production is correct.
So is that 7.8? Is that, I think it talks about determining appropriate pit wall geometry. And so what I suppose what I was concerned about then was there's a subsequent calculation being done without the clarity of what the risk factor was.
So you're wanting an advice under 7.7 in terms of what factor was calculated in there?
But yeah, some certainty as to what risk factor is appropriate because yeah.
We'll talk to Mr. Lowe.
Just one question. Really, so just a question about the eastern boundary. So it's proposed to mine up to the drip line on that boundary. So just the question in my mind is just the margin by error. So the question I suppose I would ask is, if methodology is being tested in the first year on the southern boundary, this might be also a question for Mr. Lowe, is whether there needs to be just a revisiting of the setbacks on that boundary based on the outcome of that first year of mining. I'm just concerned that if we're mining up to that drip line, there's no room for error. As you said, chunks fall off, you don't discipline.
Mr. Lowe can address that, but there's a condition that doesn't allow us to remove that vegetation or for it to be able to fall in. So the testing of that is done by the program that Mr. Hurley was speaking about, in terms of as you start your test bit, you're monitoring your stability, you're checking your accuracy, and then you're running down the southern boundary with a buffer of 10 metres, and you're making sure of your accuracy. If you can't get that accuracy and you can't get that close without instability, then the company would be required by the conditions to have set back to whatever point they need to ensure that that eastern escarpment edge is not impacted.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Hurley. Thank you for your assistance.
Okay. Thank you.
Now we have Mr. Ripley joining us online.
Those ones we downloaded, I couldn't open those actually. I had to open them from the email. I'll see if I can email to you if you can open them.
Welcome, Mr. Ridley.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Sound check?
Yep. That's
Fantastic.
good, thank you.
I'm happy to read my summary statement or take questions.
Yeah, my file of that summary statement is corrupted, but essentially you're confirming the contents of your primary statement and just simply summarising your conclusions. And I think you had quite a high level of confidence that there weren't any significant erosion sediment issues subject to the application of the conditions that were circulated at that time. And I guess the question is, was that a topic that was further refined or adjusted as a result of conversations with the applicant, between the applicant and Hotini Ngāi Tahu, such that you need to report on further things, or if not, I think we just move to questions.
No, the only significant change was, which Mr. Ricker referred to, was the blockage of the two channels which entered the wetland environment. So that was the significant change from the development of the original erosion sediment control plan. But that was reflected in both my primary evidence and obviously in my summary statement.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple. Hi, Mr. Ridley. So as your role, you've been engaged to design the sediment control plan. Have you also been engaged to implement it? Or is that something that's done by the company?
No, the implementation of it, there's been no discussion of that at this stage. WMS have their own resource that helps in that space, but obviously if they require specialist input into that process, then I'm available to help in that area, as are other specialists.
And in reading the evidence, I sort of noted that it's potentially, it's a complicated business, and it involves some judgment calls, would you be confident that someone who's doesn't have your skill set and experience could implement your sediment control plan?
Yes and no. You have to have the ability to be able to design and understand the design of the control measures that we're implementing. The difference that we have for this particular proposal is the significant reliance on infiltration, which Mr. Reka referred to. And that, I'm not saying that takes away the emphasis on the erosion sediment control. It's still important, particularly the erosion control side of things, in terms of minimising sediment generation. But yeah, you do need a level of skill sets to look at that design, those design elements.
And so how will we be confident that the people within the company will have that level of skill set?
I heard some of the evidence given yesterday, and Mr. Ross referred to. I think there was a question given to Mr. Ross about training of WMS staff or site staff, and I think that's one area which could help in that space. And I mean, WMS are a company that will engage experts as required in any case. So if they need expert advice or input into design of measures, then I'm sure they would do just that.
So in summary, you'd recommend some training for the relevant people?
Yeah, training, absolutely. Training helps.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to talk about the blockage of water outlets to the wetland. What rainfall period will they be designed to? Is it a 1 in 10 year event, or 1 in 50, or 1 in 100?
Probably a question we should have asked Mr. Reka in terms of the design. I'm not sure there's a specific design being looked at for those blockages. They'll be built to the same height as the surrounding land, the surrounding bunds, and that will be effectively the key design criteria for them. The key concern that I had when I was looking at those particular bunds was the stability of them, the ability for them to hold back water if they did have water holding up against them. And you would have noticed, or maybe you've noticed in the consent conditions, there's a condition now being incorporated which talks about geotechnical input into the design and construction of those bunds.
7.5. Okay.
7.5, yeah.
Well, that's useful. Thank you. Given the scale of the earthworks, 27.7 hectares is going to be opened up at any one time. Does that present any challenges in terms of it's quite a big area. Does it present any challenges in terms of the manpower and resources required to effectively manage erosion and sedimentation on that scale?
No, you do. It comes back to your previous question. You do need specialists' input and the ability to actually manage that throughout the process. So as long as we have someone on site whose role, it won't be their primary role, it'll be part of a wider role, is to manage that erosion sediment control consideration, then there's no reason why 27 hectares can't easily be managed. I'm working on sites at the moment in the Bay of Plenty, 60 hectares of earthworks, and we've in that case there we do have dedicated resource looking after that level of earthworks. 27 hectares isn't massive in an earthworks side of things, but it does require some resource.
Okay, thank you. And just the last question, and this is a question I asked yesterday, just in terms of sedimentation being brought out onto the state highway, what's the best practice mitigation to ensure that doesn't happen?
Two things. There's I call it the Northern Bund, which is proposed to be established along beside the state highway. That will be vegetated, so as a direct source of sediment, if you like, going to the state highway, the swale beside the state highway, that will be revegetated and stabilised. So that's the best mitigation in that scenario. And the other scenario is obviously traffic dragging material out onto the road. And the best scenario there, best mitigation, is what we call a stabilised entranceway, which effectively is exactly as it's called. It's just an entranceway that has a clean aggregate or sealed surface to prevent sediment being pulled onto the highway in the first instance.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Ridley. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Have a nice day.
Thanks.
All right.
We've
Now,
got Dr. Ethan next, and I'm wondering if the level of questioning, maybe start him after lunch.
yeah, I think that's a good idea. Just a question around the rehabilitation plan. Is it proposed to change the very hummocky contour to something slightly more?
It's going to be more productive.
Yeah, more
land,
productive.
so
It's not like we're trying to 9 mile site, we're trying to recreate that dune. In
Correct.
fact, we're looking for a different contour here. It's more productive and useful.
Correct. So it'll be similar drainage patterns, but it will be contoured in a way that's more productive for grazing.
Yeah, because it looks to me like it's a very hummocky landscape. I haven't been there, but the photos seem to suggest that.
Yeah, and it could be also a lot sort of pumped and hollowed, but it is a natural dune system. I think the focus on the Cape Falcon site was because it was in the coastal environment and the particularly directive provisions of the MPS.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I just realised those contours I saw are different than what I was viewing here in terms of.
Yes, correct. We actually discussed that last night, wondering whether we needed to explain that a bit more. It will look slightly flatter than what you've got.
Yeah,
now.
I can see that now.
Yeah.
All right. Well, normally lunch is 45 minutes. So if we resume at say 12:50, or that sound good?
Do you want to just coordinate with Mr. Payne if he's listening in, because we've sort of bumped it slightly, so apology. Oh, he's probably already on anyway, but we're running. Yeah.